Professor Zix adjusted his ceremonial collar for the 47th time that morning, his iridescent scales shimmering with barely contained anxiety. The Advanced War Strategy classroom aboard the Galactic Military Academy's prestigious space station, the enlightened mind, had never felt so threatening. By the 7 moons of rationality, he muttered, his secondary breathing apparatus wheezing slightly. It's just one human. How bad could it be? The classroom itself was a testament to 10,000 years of proper military education. Holographic displays showed meticulously planned battle formations. The walls were adorned with the mathematical equations proving the optimal angle for photon torpedo deployment. Even the students' seats were arranged in a perfect hexagonal pattern that maximized both learning efficiency and escape routes, a design feature that had never seemed so relevant until today. As his students filed in a mix of arthropoid Zentari, crystalline lumini, and gaseous cloudern beings, Zix felt a small surge of pride. Each moved with precisely calculated steps, their uniforms pressed to regulation standards, data tablets held at exactly 47 degrees from their bodies or equivalent crystalline matrices. This was how proper military officers should behave. Then she walked in. Lieutenant Sarah Chaos Chen and whoever had approved that call sign would be receiving a strongly worded letter practically bounced through the doorway. Her uniform, while technically meeting regulations, somehow managed to look like it had been put through a quantum tumbler. Her hair, and Zix still couldn't understand why humans kept those protein filaments on their heads, was tied back in something she called a messy bun that seemed to defy several laws of physics. Morning, Prof. Z, she chirped, dropping into her seat with all the grace of a Morjulian cargo freighter. Love what you've done with the place. Very straight edge. Several Lumini students literally vibrated with disapproval, their crystalline forms emitting soft, scandalized chimes. Lieutenant Chen Zix acknowledged, using his most formal third-tone voice, I trust you've reviewed the required materials on proper fleet formation theories. Oh yeah, totally. She pulled out her data tablet, which was covered in what appeared to be coffee stains and... Were those cartoon stickers? I especially liked the part about the pincer movement of glorious victory, though I had some thoughts about improving it with what we humans call a yeet and retreat strategy. The professor's scales shifted from their professional blue-green to a worried mauve. In his centuries of teaching, he'd never had a student use the word yeet in his classroom. He wasn't entirely sure it was even a word. Yes, well, he began, activating the main holographic display. Today we will be discussing the time-honored principles of strategic engagement as codified by the great Admiral Zizek Tick in the year of reasonable advancement. As he spoke, he noticed Lieutenant Chen doodling what appeared to be a spacecraft with flame decals on its sides. She'd even added a small note that read speed holes more boom. Zix discreetly activated his personal stress relief pheromone dispenser. It was going to be a very long semester. And so Professor Zix continued, his third appendage gracefully manipulating the holographic display. We see that the triaxial formation allows for optimal energy distribution while maintaining shield coherency across all vessels. He paused for effect, noting with satisfaction the dutiful note-taking of his proper students. Would anyone care to explain why this is considered one of the foundational patterns of modern space warfare? A Zentari student raised 3 of their appendages in perfect synchronization. According to Strategic Protocol 7249b, the triaxial formation represents the ideal balance between offensive capability and defensive sustainability, as proven by Admiral Zizek during the Great Rationalization. Excellent, most dedicated student. Click. Your answer shows appropriate respect for established doctrine. Yeah, but what if we just Sarah made a whooshing sound, complete with hand gestures that looked disturbingly like explosion mimicry, ram the ships together? The silence that followed was so profound that even the gaseous Cloudern students temporarily ceased their eternal molecular vibration. I beg your pardon, Lieutenant Chen Zix's scales shifted through 3 different shades of horrified purple. Well, look at this formation. Sarah stood up, walking to the hologram with all the casual disregard of someone approaching a plasma reactor with a sandwich. You've got all these ships lined up nice and pretty, right? But that means the enemy knows exactly where you're going to be. What if instead? She grabbed the holographic controls, causing several Lumini students to emit distressed crystalline harmonics. We did this. The meticulously arranged fleet display transformed into what could only be described as a cosmic game of bumper cars. Ships were clustered together in what she cheerfully termed a chaos ball. See, they'll never expect it. Plus, when you've got ships this close together, their shields can actually overlap and create these cool resonance patterns that Lieutenant Chen, Professor Zexvex's voice cracked into his rarely used fourth octave. That is simply he took a moment to activate his emergency backup stress relief pheromone dispenser. What you are suggesting violates no fewer than 27 established principles of fleet logistics, not to mention the severe risk of collision damage. Oh, that's the best part. Sarah's eyes lit up with what the professor was learning to recognize as dangerous enthusiasm. If you're going to crash anyway, might as well make it count. Back on Earth, we call it controlled, unplanned, rapid contact. A luminized student in the front row actually cracked, small crystalline shards tinkling to the floor in distress. Lieutenant Zixvex said, trying to maintain his composure while simultaneously signaling the classroom's automated medical response system for the Lumini student, perhaps we should review the chapter of reasonable approaches, specifically Section 12, why we don't use ships as projectile weapons. But have you considered? No more considerations. The professor's scales were now cycling through colors not seen since the Great Nebula Light Show of 3457. We will return to the approved formation patterns. The same patterns that have served the Galactic Federation for millennia. The patterns that don't involve. He shuddered visibly, ramming. Sarah slumped back in her seat, but the gleam in her eyes suggested this was far from over. Fine. But just for the record, humans have this really cool thing called a fastball specialty. Moving on, Zixvex interrupted hastily, noting with alarm that several Zentari students had already begun researching fastball special on their data tablets. Let us discuss the much safer topic of proper spacing in the double helix defense formation. As he began his next lecture segment, he couldn't help but notice Lieutenant Chen sketching what appeared to be a ship design labeled Space Bowling Ball. Now, with extra spikes, he made a mental note to schedule an appointment with the Academy's psychological support services, and possibly to update his personal insurance policy. In the back of the room, a Cloudern student had condensed into a worried droplet, leaving a small note that read, requesting transfer to less advanced war strategy class, floating in their usual spot. The next few weeks at the Galactic Military Academy became what the maintenance staff would later describe as an exercise in controlled panic. Professor Zixvex had taken to carrying 3 backup stress relief pheromone dispensers, and the Academy's procurement office was beginning to ask questions about his increasing orders for calming supplements. During a lecture on energy weapon optimization, Sarah's hand shot up with the kind of enthusiasm that now made several nearby students activate their personal shield generators. So crazy, thought she began, ignoring the collective wince that had become the classroom's standard response to those words. Have you guys ever tried turning the plasma cannons backwards for extra thrust? Professor Zixvex's scales turned a shade of green previously unknown to xenobiologists. Lieutenant Chen, plasma cannons are precision-engineered weapons designed for forward deployment in carefully calculated combat scenarios. They are not propulsion devices. Right, but hear me out, Sarah continued, pulling up a hastily drawn diagram on her sticker-covered tablet. If you reverse the polarity and overclock the containment field. Absolutely not. While simultaneously venting the excess plasma through the secondary cooling systems. This is not how you basically get a turbo boost. I call it the spicy space sneeze maneuver. From the front row, a tall, elegantly proportioned Zentari rose to their full height, all 8 appendages arranged in the traditional pose of academic objection. This was Karex Tick, pride of the Academy and holder of 73 consecutive perfect scores in advanced strategic theory. Professor Karex Tick's voice resonated with perfectly modulated disapproval. I must formally protest. What Lieutenant Chen suggests not only violates the sacred laws of tactical engagement, but also basic thermodynamics. Thank you, most distinguished student. Karex Tick, Professor Zixvex said gratefully. Perhaps you could enlighten the class on the proper application of plasma-based weaponry. Karex Tick activated their personal holoprojector, displaying a series of immaculately organized combat matrices. As clearly stated in Volume 47 of Standard Combat Procedures, plasma weaponry should be deployed in precise, calculated bursts following the Fibonacci sequence of. Boring, Sarah interjected. Where's the pizzazz? The razzle-dazzle. The unexpected oh-snap factor. Oh-snap is not a recognized tactical parameter, Karex Tick responded, their antenna twitching in irritation. My calculations show that adherence to traditional doctrine results in a 78.3% success rate in standardized combat scenarios. Sarah leaned forward, grinning. Yeah, but what about non-standard scenarios, like what if the enemy is having Taco Tuesday? What is a taco? And why does Tuesday affect combat efficiency? Oh man, you haven't lived until you've tried to maintain proper formation after your entire crew hits the salsa bar. Talk about unpredictable trajectories. The professor watched in horror as Sarah pulled up another diagram, this one labeled Tactical Advantages of Food Coma-Induced Combat Patterns. HFY's exoskeleton was now clicking in what the Academy's medical staff recognized as the early stages of a logic-induced breakdown. Combat patterns must follow established protocols. There is no room for 4. Digestive variables. That's quitter talk. Sarah was now fully animated, bouncing in her seat. Hey, has anyone ever tried using the artificial gravity generators to create a sort of space mosh pit? You could totally throw the enemy's targeting systems off. A luminized student in the third row began to emit a high-pitched crystalline whine of distress. Or what about this? We fill some cargo pods with glitter. Lieutenant Chen, Professor Vex interrupted, his scales now cycling through colors faster than a malfunctioning disco ball. Perhaps we should return to HFY's presentation on proper plasma cannon protocols. Fine, but I'm just saying, if you're going to have a space battle, why not make it fabulous? HFY's presentation continued, though now punctuated by Sarah's occasional muttered comments like needs more explosions, and what if we added rocket-powered space mines that play music? The tension in the classroom had reached such levels that 2 Cloudern students had to be excused after partially evaporating from stress. HFY's precisely planned presentation was now peppered with twitches whenever Sarah raised her hand, which she did with increasing frequency and decreasing regard for physical laws. In conclusion, HFY stated, their voice straining to maintain its proper academic tone, adherence to established tactical doctrine ensures predictable and favorable outcomes in 94.7% of simulated encounters. But what about the other 5.3%? Sarah asked innocently. That's where the fun happens. That's where you get to try things like the double reverse cowboy with the triple axle maneuver. That's not even a real tactical term. It is now. I just invented it. Patent pending. Professor Vex watched as his star student and his most innovative student faced off, one surrounded by holographic charts and probability matrices, the other doodling what appeared to be a spacecraft doing a barrel roll while throwing confetti. Perhaps he suggested weakly, we should move on to our next topic, the importance of maintaining emotional stability during combat operations. Sarah's hand shot up again. Oh, is that when we talk about blasting music through the enemy's comm systems? Because I've got this great playlist called Songs to Commit War Crimes to. The professor noted with resignation that his last backup pheromone dispenser was running low. Meanwhile, HFY had begun reciting the litany of proper procedures under their breath, all 8 appendages twitching in synchronized distress. It was becoming clear that the traditional approach to galactic warfare was about to undergo some very uncomfortable evolution. The day of the Academy's annual strategic combat simulation had arrived, and Professor Vex was already on his 5th calming supplement. The massive simulation chamber, normally a testament to orderly military advancement, had been transformed into what he could only describe as a powder keg with a human-shaped fuse. As per tradition, the Academy's chief administrator Kr announced, their ceremonial robes flowing in the artificial breeze, a feature nobody had requested but maintenance couldn't figure out how to turn off. Our top student shall face this year's most noteworthy challenger. HFY stood at their command console, all 8 appendages perfectly positioned according to the manual of proper military posture. Their simulation fleet was arranged in what centuries of tactical doctrine recognized as the ultimate formation of assured victory. Sarah, on the other hand, was slouched in her command chair, feet up on the console, slurping what appeared to be her 4th cup of coffee. Her fleet looked like someone had thrown a handful of ship models into a zero-gravity blender. Before we begin, she announced, handing her coffee to a horrified Lumini observer, hold my coffee. This is going to get weird. The simulation chamber's massive screens lit up, displaying both fleets. HFY's ships moved with mathematical precision, each vessel's position calculated to 15 decimal places. The formation was a thing of beauty, bringing tears to the eyes of several veteran instructors. Sarah's first move was to have her entire fleet perform what she called a synchronized swimming routine to the beat of ancient Earth music that had somehow been smuggled into the simulation system. The speakers blasted something called Cotton Eye Joe. Lieutenant Chen, Professor Vex's scales were shifting so rapidly he was beginning to attract moths. This is a serious military exercise. Oh, I'm serious, Sarah grinned, typing commands with one hand while using the other to conduct her fleet like an orchestra. This is my special confuse and amuse strategy. Phase 1, the distraction dance. Carx Tick, momentarily stunned by the spectacle, quickly recovered their composure. Initiating standard victory pattern Delta 7, their fleet moved forward, in perfect formation, weapon systems charging according to regulations. Cool, 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 Sarah nodded, taking a bite of something she called a burrito. Where had she even gotten that? Hey, watch this. I call it Operation Party Crasher. To the horror of every instructor present, Sarah's fleet suddenly split into what could only be described as organized chaos. Small fighter squadrons peeled off in spiral patterns, their pilots apparently instructed to fly like nobody's watching. Larger ships began executing maneuvers that violated several laws of physics and at least one international treaty. This is impossible. Carx Tick's antennae were twitching so hard they threatened to achieve liftoff. Your ships are executing patterns that have no basis in tactical doctrine. That's where you're wrong, buddy, Sarah replied, now standing on her chair for better dramatic effect. I'm using a little something I like to call spicy improvisation. Phase 2, the glitter bomb gambit. To everyone's astonishment, several of Sarah's cargo ships suddenly burst open, releasing clouds of simulated space debris that, for some reason, sparkled. Are those actual disco balls? Someone whispered in horrified awe. Tactical spacing is compromised. Carx Tick was frantically adjusting their formation. Targeting systems are being confused by unauthorized reflective surfaces. And now for my favorite part, Sarah announced, pressing a series of buttons with flourishes that were definitely not in any military manual. Phase 3, the big boom boogie. What happened next would be debated in academy halls for decades to come. Sarah's ships, already moving in patterns that made seasoned tacticians reach for motion sickness pills, began using their own weapon systems in ways that defied conventional wisdom. Plasma cannons fired backwards for impromptu boost maneuvers. Shield generators were synchronized to create what she called bounce house bubbles. One particularly large cruiser was spinning like a cosmic ballet dancer, using its centrifugal force to fling smaller ships into the enemy formation. This isn't warfare, Carx Tick protested, their perfect formation now scattered like startled space pigeons. This is jazz, Sarah whooped, now literally dancing as she input commands. Everything's better with jazz, including space battles. The simulation's physics engine was beginning to smoke from the calculations it was being forced to perform. Carx Tick's carefully planned assault had devolved into damage control as their ships tried to adapt to maneuvers that no sane military strategist would ever conceive. And for my final trick, Sarah announced, I present the solar system shuffle. The remaining ships in her fleet suddenly linked together in what appeared to be a conga line configuration, their shield harmonics creating a cascading wave of energy that somehow bypassed every known defense protocol. Alert, the simulation computer announced in a tone that suggested it needed a vacation. Unknown tactical configuration detected. Error cannot compute probability of success. Error reality parameters exceeded. Error, please stop whatever that last maneuver was. When the virtual dust settled, Carx Tick's perfect fleet lay in disarray, outmaneuvered by what several observers would later describe as a cosmic circus on Sugar Rush. How Carx Tick demanded, all 8 appendages slumped in defeat. How did you overcome thousands of years of tactical doctrine? Sarah retrieved her coffee, which had somehow remained hot throughout the entire ordeal. Simple. Nobody expects a conga line in space. Professor Zix Vex, who had been silent throughout the demonstration, finally found his voice. Lieutenant Chen, what you have done here today is awesome. Unprecedented, he finished weakly, scales having given up on color changes and settled for a resigned gray. The simulation records show your tactics had a success rate of... Don't tell me. Let me guess, Sarah interrupted. 5.3%. Actually 94.8%, the professor admitted, checking the final calculations. Though I'm not entirely sure the computer knows how to categorize whatever that last maneuver was. The chamber was silent, except for the faint sound of the simulation engine whimpering and what might have been Carx Tick reciting the entire manual of standard procedures from memory as a comfort mechanism. So Sarah said brightly, finishing her coffee, same time next week. I've got some ideas involving space torpedoes and something I call the electric slide surprise. The maintenance staff immediately submitted a group request for hazard pay. The emergency faculty meeting following the simulation had to be relocated 3 times first, because the original room's emotion-sensing lights couldn't handle the collective anxiety. then because a Cloudron professor had accidentally condensed into their liquid form from shock, and finally because they needed a bigger holoscreen to display all of Sarah's tactical innovations. Professor Zix stood before his colleagues, his scales having settled into a peculiar shade that the medical staff had dubbed existential mauve. As you can see from this diagram, he gestured to a holographic replay that looked more like an orbital rave than a battle plan. Lieutenant Chen's methods achieved unprecedented success rates by exploiting what she calls the fundamentals of warfare. A collective groan echoed through the room at the pun. But how demanded Professor NX Tick of Classical Formation Studies, who had been prescribed anxiety medication after watching the simulation? Her tactics violated every principle we've taught for millennia. That Zix replied, pulling up another replay, appears to be precisely why they worked. Observe this maneuver, which she has labeled the electric slide surprise. The hologram showed Sarah's ships performing what appeared to be a synchronized dance routine while simultaneously overwhelming CarX Tick's carefully planned defense grid. By introducing elements of complete unpredictability, she effectively rendered useless all standard countermeasures and response protocols. The enemy cannot predict what you will do if even you don't know what you're doing. In the back of the room, CarX Tick sat, surrounded by comfort blankets and therapy crystals, still muttering calculations under their breath. Their latest tactical thesis had been reduced to a single repeated phrase, but why did the conga line work? Furthermore, Zix continued, advancing to the next slide. Her glitter bomb gambit proved surprisingly effective at disrupting targeting systems. We've had to update our entire sensor array protocols to account for what she calls tactical sparkle warfare. The faculty watched in mixed horror and fascination as the replay showed Sarah's fleet executing maneuvers that seemed to be equal parts ballet, demolition derby, and what she had termed at one time at space prom. Most disturbingly, Zix added, his voice dropping to a whisper, some of her innovations are showing genuine tactical merit. The backwards plasma cannon thrust, while completely insane, increased maneuverability by 47%, and the synchronized shield harmonics during the space conga created an energy wave pattern that our best scientists are still trying to explain. A junior professor raised their appendage. But this goes against everything in the standard combat manual. Perhaps Zix replied, his scales shifting to a thoughtful blue. That's something we need to reconsider. The manual, after all, was written by those who expected their enemies to follow the same rules. The room erupted in shocked gasps and one crystalline shriek of protest. I know, he held up his primary appendages in a calming gesture. But consider this: in the 1,000 years since the manual's last update, how many species have we encountered who approach combat like humans do? You mean with complete disregard for proper protocol and an unhealthy enthusiasm for explosions, someone muttered. Exactly. And how many of those encounters ended in our tactical doctrines being uncomfortably revised? The silence that followed was broken only by CarX Tick's quiet sobbing and what sounded suspiciously like Sarah practicing dance moves in the hallway outside. Professor Zix squared his shoulders, his scales finally settling into a determined shade of purple. Perhaps it's time we acknowledge that there might be alternative approaches to strategic thinking. Approaches that, while utterly terrifying and possibly in violation of several physics laws, have proven effectively. Are you suggesting we actually teach these methods? The horror in the room was palpable. I'm suggesting we learn from them. After all, he added, pulling up one final replay of Sarah's fleet performing what she had dubbed the Macarena maneuver of mass destruction. If we can't beat them, join them, someone squeaked. At least understand them enough to survive them. In the hallway, Sarah's voice could be heard enthusiastically explaining something called tactical breakdancing to a group of terrified first-year students. The future of galactic warfare was about to get a lot more entertaining. The official announcement from the Galactic Military Academy's Board of Directors was printed on regulation paper, formatted in accordance with all proper documentation protocols, and yet somehow still managed to cause widespread panic. New course offering alternative strategic thinking, or how I learned to stop worrying and love the chaos. Guest lecturer Lieutenant Sarah Chaos Chen. Professor Zix sat in his office, surrounded by empty bottles of anxiety medication, reviewing Sarah's proposed curriculum. Week 1 Introduction to Improvised Battle Tactics now with added jazz. Week 2 Why Every Fleet Needs a Playlist. Week 3 Advanced Glitter Deployment in 0G. Week 4 Synchronized Space, Dancing a Tactical Advantage. He reached for his last anxiety pill, then paused as he read the latest enrollment update. Apparently, word had spread about Sarah's unconventional success. Next semester would see an influx of new exchange students, all human. The note at the bottom of their applications read, "Don't worry, we've heard great things about your interpretive dance approach to space combat." Zix swallowed the pill dry and began drafting his retirement notice. But as he watched Sarah in the courtyard, enthusiastically teaching a group of Zentari students something called the worm, he couldn't help but smile. Perhaps the galaxy's military doctrine needed a little chaos after all. Though he did make a note to order more anxiety medication. A lot more. Sarah.